"Don't sign that paper, sir." The voice was small but firm, the kind of voice that did not belong in a 47th floor conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. The pen in Edward Calloway's hand stopped a quarter-inch above the signature line. He had been mid-sentence, exchanging some final pleasantry with the man across the table, and now there was a child standing inside the doorway holding the strap of a small purple backpack with both hands. Edward did not lift the pen yet. He turned his head slowly toward the sound. She could not have been older than 7. Her skin was a warm dark brown, and her hair was braided into 2 long plaits that fell forward over her shoulders, each one tied at the end with a small wooden bead. She was wearing a navy school cardigan with the crest of a public elementary stitched on the breast pocket, a white blouse beneath, and a pleated gray skirt that came just past her knees. Her shoes were brown leather, scuffed at the toe, and the right lace was tied in a double bow because the left one had been retied so many times the plastic tip had come off. She had a small scrape on her left knee, the kind a child gets from a sidewalk and forgets about within the hour. Her eyes were enormous and her chin was lifted, and she was looking at Edward Calloway the way a person looks at someone they have come a very long way to find. His attorney, Howard Brennan, was already turning toward the door, half rising from his chair, his face arranging itself into the polite irritation of a man whose afternoon has been interrupted by something he intends to remove quickly. "How did you?" Howard began. "Wait," Edward said. He set the pen down. He did not put the cap on. He set it down across the top of the document, the way a man sets down a tool he intends to come back to in a moment. The room, which had been full of the low hum of polite anticipation, went very still. Across the table, the cellar, a man named Victor Pell, had not moved. His attorney had not moved. The 2 assistants by the credenza had not moved. The only people moving in the room were Edward and the girl had only moved her eyes, which were locked now on the pen. "Sweetheart," Edward said carefully, "how did you get up here?" "The elevator," she said. "I pressed 47. Mama said that's where you'd be." "Who's your mama?" "Mrs. Daniels. She cleans the offices at night. She cleaned this one last night." Edward heard Howard exhale, slow and controlled, the exhale of a man whose afternoon was about to be more complicated than he had prepared for. The cellar, Victor Pell, did not exhale. He had gone very still in the particular way a man goes still when something has begun to happen that he did not plan for. "What's your name?" Edward asked. "Imani Daniels." "Imani, how old are you?" 7.5. "Does your mama know you're here?" The girl's chin moved a small fraction, neither up nor down. "She doesn't know I came up. She thinks I'm waiting in the lobby. I came because I read your papers last night." "You read my papers?" "They were on the table in the room with the long table. The cleaning carts go in there last because nobody's in there at night. Mama lets me sit at the chair while she does the carpets because the chairs spin. I was spinning. The papers were there. They had your name at the top in big letters, Mr. Edward Calloway, so I read them." A small ripple moved around the conference table. The cellar's attorney had begun very slowly to close the folder in front of him. Howard Brennan saw the gesture. His eyes narrowed. "Imani," Edward said. He was speaking very softly now, the way a person speaks to a deer that has wandered into a yard. "What did the papers say?" "They said you were going to give him your buildings on Halsted Street." She pointed across the table without looking. Her finger stopped well short of Victor Pell, but everyone in the room understood who she meant. All 4 of them. The ones with the apartments where my auntie lives and where my friend Camille lives and where the old man with the dog who waves at me on the way to school lives. "That's right," Edward said carefully. "We're discussing a transaction." "But the papers said you weren't getting paid for them," Imani said. The pen on the contract did not move, but every other thing in the room seemed to. Howard Brennan had been Edward Calloway's personal attorney for 11 years. In those 11 years, Howard had developed a particular face that he used during sensitive negotiations, a face Edward had come to think of privately as the wall. It was a face that gave nothing away, took nothing in, and made the people across the table feel that they were negotiating against a building rather than a man. Howard's wall came down in stages. Edward watched it happen. First, the color left his cheeks. It went out of him the way water leaves a glass tipped slowly to one side, draining from his forehead and his ears and finally from his lips, which parted very slightly without making any sound. Then his hand, which had been resting flat on his own copy of the document, lifted half an inch off the page and stayed there, hovering as if he had forgotten what hands were for. Then his eyes moved. Not toward Imani, not toward Edward. They moved toward Victor Pell. And what Edward saw in Howard's eyes in that moment was something he had never seen there in 11 years, which was fear. "Imani," Edward said. He did not look at Howard. He kept his voice gentle. "Can you come a little closer? I want to hear you better." She glanced behind her toward the hallway, toward the place where her mother presumably did not yet know she was missing. Then she walked across the carpet on her scuffed brown shoes. She stopped beside Edward's chair. The top of her head reached his shoulder. He could smell the faint scent of cocoa butter and pencil shavings, the way small girls smell when they have come straight from school. "Imani, the papers you read, were there a lot of them? This many?" She held her fingers about 3 inches apart. "That's a lot of papers." "I didn't read all the words. Just the ones I knew." "What words did you know?" she thought. The tip of her tongue came out and pressed against her upper lip the way it does in children who are still learning that thinking is a thing other people can see. "Your name, his name." She did not turn toward Victor Pell. "The street name, the number that said how much money." There were 2 numbers. One was small and one was very big. The small one had your name, the big one had his. Across the table, Victor Pell finally spoke. "This is highly irregular. Mr. Calloway, I'm sure your attorney can explain that children sometimes misunderstand documents that are above their reading level. Perhaps we could continue this in a moment after the child has been returned to her mother." Edward did not look at him. "Howard," he said. Howard Brennan did not answer. "Howard," Edward said again. Howard's mouth opened. His tongue touched his lower lip. He swallowed. "Edward, I think the child is confused about which document she was looking at. There were preliminary drafts circulating last week. Some of those drafts contained, placeholder figures that did not represent the final terms." "Imani," Edward said, still gentle, still not looking at Howard. "The small number with my name on it, do you remember anything about it? It had a 1 and then a dot. 1 dot. Then a 0. And another 0. Where was the big number?" "At the bottom, where his name was. It had a lot of zeros. I counted them. There were 8. Edward did the small math in his head. He did it twice, because the first time it did not seem possible. The buildings on Halsted Street, 4 of them, pre-war brick, fully tenanted, in a neighborhood that the city's planning commission had quietly rezoned 3 months earlier for commercial development. He had purchased them 18 years ago for $41 million. Their current appraised value was a number he knew because he reviewed it every quarter. It was not 1.00. He turned his head, finally, toward Howard. He looked at his attorney of 11 years, the godfather to his daughter, the man who had stood beside him at his wife's funeral. "Howard," he said, "what's in the contract?" Howard Brennan did not answer the question. He looked at the document in front of him, then at the pen lying across it, then at the small girl standing beside Edward's chair. His mouth worked twice without producing sound. Edward stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not push back his chair with any particular violence. He simply stood, and in standing became something the room had to reckon with. He was 6'2". He had played college baseball 30 years ago, and his shoulders still remembered it. "Imani," he said, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to go stand by that wall over there, the one with the painting of the boats. I'm going to ask you to wait there for a few minutes while I sort some things out with these gentlemen. You're not in any trouble. You did exactly the right thing by telling me. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Go on now." She walked to the wall. She did not run. She walked the careful walk of a child who has been told not to run in hallways and has decided that a conference room counts. When she reached the wall, she turned around and stood with her back against it, both hands holding her backpack straps, and watched. Edward pressed the button on the conference phone in the center of the table. "Marcia," he said. "It's Edward. I need you to call Teresa Vance at Vance and Mooring and ask her to come to the 47th floor immediately. Tell her I'm asking personally. Tell her I will explain when she arrives. Then I need you to call building security and ask them to send 2 officers to the conference room. Not to enter, to wait outside the door. Then I need you to hold all my afternoon appointments. Then I need you to find a woman named Mrs. Daniels who cleans these offices at night and locate her current phone number. Her daughter is up here and she needs to know her daughter is safe." "Yes, Mr. Calloway. Thank you, Marcia." He released the button. Victor Pell had not moved during any of this, but something in his shoulders had changed. The polite expectancy of a man closing a transaction had been replaced by the careful neutrality of a man who is recalculating in real time. His attorney, a woman in a navy suit whose name Edward suddenly could not remember, had laid both her hands flat on the table in front of her, palms down, in what looked like a deliberate gesture of stillness. "Edward," Howard said. His voice came out thinner than he intended. "Edward, we should speak privately. There has been a misunderstanding. The terms are complex. There are tax considerations that the structure. Howard, I have known you for 22 years. You are the godfather of my daughter. I am asking you a direct question, and I am asking you in front of the people who are sitting at this table. What is in this contract?" Howard's hand came up to his mouth, then down to the knot of his tie, then to the table again. He was a man searching for a place to put a hand that did not exist. "There is a separate," he began. "Speak up. There is a separate agreement, pursuant to the sale, a consulting arrangement, with a company that Mr. Pell has interests in. The dollar value of the Halstead properties was structured to reflect the consolidated transaction, including the consulting arrangement, which provides a contingent return to a holding entity." "Whose holding entity, Howard?" Howard did not answer. "Howard, it is a structure in which I hold a minority, you hold an interest. A small one." "How small?" Howard closed his eyes for half a second. 49%. The room produced a sound that was not exactly silence, but the immediate aftermath of silence, the way a room sounds in the second after a glass breaks. Victor Pell's attorney closed her folder entirely. Across the table, Victor himself had begun, very slowly, to lean back in his chair. Imani was still standing against the wall, watching. Teresa Vance arrived at 2:51 p.m., which was 11 minutes after Marcia had placed the call. Edward had used 3 of those 11 minutes to ask Howard Brennan to surrender his copy of the contract, his briefcase, his phone, and his building access card, and to wait in the small interior office adjacent to the conference room until further notice. Howard had complied. He had not argued. He had walked to the small office with the careful, steady walk of a man who understands that his life as he knew it ended 6 minutes ago, and is trying to remember how to operate his legs without it. Edward had used the remaining 8 minutes to do 2 things. The first was to ask Marcia to bring a juice box and a small package of crackers from the executive kitchen for Imani, who was still standing against the wall but who had begun to shift her weight from foot to foot in the way of small children who are bored by adult tension. Marcia had brought apple juice and saltines on a small ceramic plate and had asked Imani, very gently, if she would like to sit in one of the soft chairs by the window. Imani had looked at Edward. Edward had nodded. Imani had taken the juice box and walked to the chair and climbed into it and disappeared almost entirely into its leather depths, the top of her head and the tips of her brown shoes the only parts of her visible from the conference table. The second thing was to look at Victor Pell across the conference table for a long, quiet moment and ask him whether he would like to leave now under his own power, or whether he would prefer to wait for the federal authorities Edward intended to call as soon as new counsel arrived. Victor Pell had said, very calmly, that he would like to leave now. His attorney had said that her client was leaving under protest, and that any further communication should go through her office. She had given Edward her card. Edward had not taken it. She had laid it on the table. She and Victor had left. Teresa Vance came through the conference room door at 2:51. She was a tall woman in her early 50s with iron gray hair cut short, and a tan trench coat she did not remove because she had not yet decided how long she would be staying. She had been Edward's outside counsel on 3 matters over the years, all of them complex, all of them one. Edward trusted her because she did not flatter him and because she had once told him in writing that a position he had taken on a regulatory matter was wrong, which had cost her a fee and had probably saved him $8 million. She looked at the conference room. She looked at Edward. She looked at the leather chair from which a small pair of brown shoes was protruding. She looked back at Edward. "Talk to me," she said. Edward talked to her. He talked for 4 minutes. He gave her the short, clean version, the version of a man who had spent 30 years summarizing complex situations for boards and bankers. The deal, the buildings, the structure, the disclosure that had not been made, Howard's interest, the child, the papers on the table. He did not editorialize. He did not name what he was feeling. He spoke in the past tense about events that had occurred 8 minutes ago because it was the only grammar available. Teresa listened without writing. When he finished, she said, "Where's Brennan?" "In the side office." "He's still here?" "Yes." "Good. I want him here when the federal agent arrives, and I want him to understand that staying here voluntarily is the only currency he has left. Have you called yet?" "Not yet. I wanted you in the room first." "Smart. Where's the child?" Edward nodded toward the leather chair. Teresa walked over. She crouched slowly, the way a tall woman crouches when she is going to need her knees later. She looked into the chair. Imani looked back at her over the top of the juice box. "Hi," Teresa said. "Hi," Imani said. "My name is Teresa. I'm a lawyer. That means I help people figure out what to do when something complicated happens. Mr. Calloway asked me to come here so I could help him with something complicated. Is it all right if I ask you some questions?" "Yes, ma'am. You are very polite. My mama says politeness is free." "Your mama is right. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Imani Daniels." "How old are you, Imani?" 7.5. "What grade are you in?" "Second. My teacher is Ms. Akafor. She's from Nigeria. She has a map on the wall." Teresa wrote nothing. She kept her face exactly where it was, 3 feet from the chair level with Imani's, and she let the small girl talk. Edward had watched Teresa work before. He had watched her cross-examine men with private jets. He had never seen her crouched in a trench coat in front of a leather chair, and yet she was doing exactly the thing she always did, which was to make the person across from her feel that she had all afternoon and no other place to be. "Imani, last night when you were in the room with the long table, can you tell me what time it was?" "After dinner. Mama brings dinner in a plastic container and we eat in the room with the little kitchen. Then she does the carpets. The room with the long table is the last room because nobody works there at night." "What was on the table?" "The papers, a pen on top, a folder, a glass of water that was empty. The chairs were not pushed in. One chair was turned around like somebody got up fast." "Were the papers in the folder or out of it?" "Out." "They were spread, like someone had been reading them?" "Yes, like that." "Imani, this is important. When you read your name, I mean Mr. Calloway's name, was it on the very first page or somewhere inside?" "The first page, in big letters. Then on a lot of the other pages too." I looked. His name was on almost every page." "Did you see Howard Brennan's name? The man who went into the little office?" "Yes, him." Imani thought. "I saw a name with an H. It was at the bottom of one of the back pages, in small letters, not like Mr. Calloway's name, small, in a different part of the page. In a different part, like a footnote. I don't know what a footnote is. Like a little note at the very bottom of the page in tiny letters." "Yes, like that." Teresa did not look at Edward, but Edward, standing 6 feet away with his hands in his trouser pockets, felt the temperature of her attention shift. She had just confirmed, from a 7-year-old, the existence of a disclosure buried in fine print at the bottom of a back page of a contract Howard had walked him through 48 hours ago for what Howard had described as a final read. Imani, one more question and then I'll let you finish your juice. Why did you decide to come up here today? The girl thought about this for a long time. She held the juice box very carefully on her lap with both hands, and she looked at the floor, then at the window, then at Edward, then back at Teresa. My auntie cried last week, she said. She came over for Sunday dinner and she told my mama that the man who owned her building was selling it and the new man was going to make everybody leave. My auntie has lived in that building for 12 years. She said 12 years. She said the new man wanted to put up something else. She didn't know what. She cried in our kitchen. I was at the table doing my homework. I heard her. Then last night I saw Mr. Calloway's name on the papers and I saw the street name. I knew the street name because that's my auntie's street, so I read what I could read. She took a small sip of juice. And then I told Mama I had to come to the building today after school because my class was doing a project, which was not true. She looked up at Teresa. I'm sorry I lied to my mama, she said. Teresa Vance, who had been a litigator for 27 years and was rarely surprised by anything that came out of any human mouth, took a slow breath through her nose and let it out through her mouth. Imani, she said, I am going to tell your mama myself that you lied, and I am going to tell her exactly why, and I am going to tell her that what you did took more courage than most grown people in this city have. I think she will understand. I think she will be proud. I do not think you should be the one who has to explain it. Is that all right with you? Yes, ma'am. All right, Teresa stood. Her knees clicked audibly in the quiet room. She turned to Edward. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, Edward, a word. They walked to the far end of the conference room by the boat's painting. Teresa's voice when she spoke was very low. I'm going to call the field office, she said. Not the local FBI. There's a financial crimes unit that handles undisclosed counterparty interests in real estate transactions, and they have been quietly asking some of us in the bar about a pattern of these arrangements involving the same handful of buyer-side principals. Victor Pell is not a new name to them. I am going to say his name and Brennan's name in the same sentence, and I am going to watch what happens. Do it. Before I do, I need you to understand what's about to happen to your week. There will be subpoenas. Your firm's records are about to become discoverable. Brennan's files will be sealed. Other transactions he handled for you over the last decade will be reviewed. You are going to find out things about your past business decisions that you may not enjoy finding out. Are you prepared for that? Edward looked across the room at the leather chair. Imani had finished her juice and had set the empty box on the side table with the small, careful precision of a child who has been taught to clean up after herself. She had taken a book out of her purple backpack. She was reading it with her finger moving under the words. Yes, he said. All right. Teresa stepped to the corner of the room and made the call. Edward did not listen. He walked back to the conference table. He picked up the contract from in front of his own seat. He turned to the last page where the signature line waited, clean and unmarked, the pen still lying across it. He picked up the pen. He capped it. He set it down beside the contract. Then he picked up the document with both hands and walked it to the leather chair and crouched, the way Teresa had crouched, slowly because his own knees were no longer young. Imani, he said. She looked up from her book. I want to tell you something, and I want you to remember it. I am 61 years old. I have signed a lot of papers in my life. Some of them have been good papers and some of them have been bad ones, but until today I have always read every word before I signed. Today, because I trusted somebody I should not have trusted as completely as I did, I almost signed a paper without reading it the way I should have. If you had not walked into this room when you did, I would have signed it. Do you understand what that means? She nodded slowly. It means I owe you something I cannot pay back with money. Do you understand that too? She thought about it. Then she said, Mr. Calloway, my mama is going to be very upset when she finds out I came up here. I know. Could you tell her I was good? Edward Calloway, who had not cried in public in 40 years, who had not cried at his wife's funeral because he had cried alone in the car beforehand, felt something move behind his eyes that he had to swallow back down before he could speak. "Yes," he said, "I will tell her you were very good." Marcia brought Mrs. Daniels up to the 47th floor at 3:32. Edward heard them in the hallway before he saw them. He heard Marcia's quiet, careful voice, and then he heard a woman's voice, sharp with the particular tightness of a mother who has been told that her child is safe and has not yet been able to see it with her own eyes. The door opened. Mrs. Daniels came in first. She was a small woman in her middle 30s, perhaps 5'3", wearing dark blue work pants and a long-sleeved gray shirt with the cleaning service logo embroidered on the chest. Her hair was pulled back into a low knot at the nape of her neck. She had the kind of tired around her eyes that does not come from a single bad night but from many years of nights, and yet her face when she came through the door was lit with something that was not tiredness at all. It was the alert ferocity of a mother who has not yet been allowed to touch her child. "Imani," she said. The leather chair erupted. Imani was across the room in 4 small running steps and into her mother's arms before Mrs. Daniels had fully stopped moving. Mrs. Daniels crouched. She held her daughter with both arms. She did not speak for several seconds. Edward saw her mouth move against the top of Imani's head, saying something he could not hear, possibly a prayer, possibly a private mother's word in a language that was just the two of them. Then she stood up, holding Imani's hand, and she looked at Edward Calloway. She did not say, "What is my daughter doing in your office?" She did not say, "How did this happen?" She looked at him with a steady, appraising look that contained no fear and no deference, only the careful weighing of a woman who has worked nights for years in buildings owned by men like him and has formed her own opinions about which of them are worth speaking to and which of them are not. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "Mrs. Daniels, my daughter came up here without my permission. I know. She is not in the habit of doing that. I want you to know that. She is a good child. She is not a child who wanders off. I know that too. Mrs. Daniels, would you sit down? I would like to explain what happened, and I would like to do it sitting, because what I have to tell you is something I'd prefer not to deliver standing in a doorway." Mrs. Daniels hesitated. Then she nodded once. She walked Imani to the leather chair and sat in the matching one beside it and pulled Imani into her lap. Imani disappeared into her mother's shoulder. Mrs. Daniels' hand came up to the back of her daughter's head and stayed there. Edward sat in the chair across from them. He did not sit at his usual end of the conference table. He sat in the soft chair facing them, close enough that they could see his face, far enough that they were not crowded. He told her. He told her in the same short, clean sentences he had used with Teresa, with the parts a mother needed to hear. The papers on the table, the street name. The decision Imani had made to come up, the contract he had been about to sign, the disclosure that had not been made, the attorney in the side office, the buildings on Halsted Street and what they had been about to become. Mrs. Daniels did not interrupt. She listened with her hand on the back of her daughter's head and her eyes on Edward's face. When he finished, she was quiet for a long beat. "My sister lives on Halsted," she said finally. "Yes. My sister and her 3 children. Yes. 12 years she has been in that building. I know. Imani told me." Mrs. Daniels closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, her voice was very even. "Mr. Calloway, what are you going to do about those buildings?" Edward Calloway had been asked many difficult questions across a conference table over the last 30 years. He had been asked them by reporters and by senators and by hostile boards and by his own wife in the final weeks of her life. He had learned over those 30 years that the only honest answer to a difficult question was the one you could still defend a year later in a quiet room. "Mrs. Daniels," he said, "I am not going to sell those buildings. Not to Mr. Pell. Not to anyone. Not for the foreseeable future. The acquisition we were closing today is dead as of the moment your daughter walked into this room. I am also going to instruct my management company, effective immediately, to halt any rent increases scheduled on those 4 properties for the next 24 months while I conduct a personal review of every lease in those buildings. I want to understand what people are paying. I want to understand what they can afford. I want to understand which of them have been there long enough that I have a moral obligation to them that the spreadsheet has not been telling me about. Mrs. Daniels did not react immediately. She watched his face with the same steady, appraising look. She was, he understood, deciding whether to believe him. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I have heard wealthy men make speeches in rooms before. I have cleaned the rooms afterward. I have emptied the waste baskets where the wealthy men threw away the napkins they wiped their mouths on while they made the speeches. I am not going to applaud a speech. I'm not asking you to." "All right, then. What I am asking you," he said, "is whether you would be willing, when you have the time, to sit down with me and Miss Vance and tell me what you know about that neighborhood, what I am missing, what the spreadsheets have not been telling me. You have a sister on that street. You have a daughter who knows the names of the people in those buildings. I have a portfolio of addresses. We do not have the same information. I would like if you are willing to fix that." Mrs. Daniels was quiet for a long moment. "I work nights," she said. "I am off on Sundays." "Sunday afternoon, then, at a time and place you choose, Miss Vance and I will come to you. You will come to me." "Yes," she nodded slowly once. It was not agreement yet, it was acknowledgement. Edward understood the difference and was grateful for it. The conference room door opened a second time. Teresa Vance stepped in, followed by a man in a dark suit who did not introduce himself immediately but stood with the patient stillness of a person who has been told to wait for the right moment. "Edward," Teresa said, "this is Agent Daniel Reyes, Financial Crimes. He's been listening to my call for the last 20 minutes and he was already in the building on another matter, which is either a coincidence or it is not, but in any case he is here. He would like a word." Agent Reyes nodded politely toward Mrs. Daniels and Imani. He did not approach them. He spoke to Edward in a low voice from across the room. "Mr. Calloway, the name Victor Pell has been on our radar for 14 months in connection with 7 other transactions in 3 states. Each of those transactions involved an undisclosed counterparty interest held by counsel for the seller. We have not, until today, had a seller-side principal voluntarily approach us in the middle of a closing. You will understand that this is a useful position for us and I hope, with your permission, a useful position for you. Agent Reyes, my attorney, will coordinate. Take whatever you need." "Thank you, sir. One question, if I may. Where is Mr. Brennan currently?" "In the side office. He has been there approximately 50 minutes. He has not used a phone." "Has he been told he cannot leave?" "He has been told he is welcome to leave. He has chosen to remain." Agent Reyes nodded slowly. "Smart of him," he said. "On balance." Howard Brennan came out of the side office at 4:11 in the afternoon, escorted by Agent Reyes and a second agent who had arrived during the previous 20 minutes. He did not look at Edward as he walked through the conference room. He looked at the carpet. His tie had been loosened. His suit jacket was folded over his arm. His briefcase was still on the conference table where he had set it down 2 hours earlier, and it would remain there because it now belonged to a federal warrant. He walked past the leather chair where Imani sat in her mother's lap. He did not look at her either. Edward thought, watching him pass, that there was a particular kind of cowardice in not looking at the child who had revealed you. He thought Howard was probably aware of this. He thought it would be one of the things Howard would have to live with, sitting in whatever room he ended up sitting in over the years to come. The door closed behind them. The room exhaled. Teresa came over and sat in the chair Edward had been sitting in earlier. She rested her elbows on her knees and laced her fingers together. She looked tired in a way Edward had never seen her look. "Edward," she said quietly, 3 things before I leave you for the evening. 1. The agents will need you tomorrow morning for a longer interview. I will be there. They have asked, and I have agreed on your behalf, that you provide a full forensic accounting of every transaction Brennan has handled for you in the last 6 years. My firm will manage that. We will have a team on it by 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. 2. Pell's attorney has already called my office, attempting to negotiate a re-engagement of the transaction at, quote, more transparent terms. I told my paralegal to thank her for her call and to inform her that the deal is not merely off but that her client should expect a tort action by Friday. 3. She glanced at the leather chair across the room. Mrs. Daniels was speaking softly to Imani about something. Imani was nodding. 3. Teresa said, "What happens to that child and her mother now?" Edward looked at her. "What do you mean what happens? Nothing happens. They go home. They go on with their lives." "I do not parachute into their lives. I do not become a story. That is not what I meant." "What did you mean?" "I meant, Edward, that there is a 7-year-old girl in this room who walked into a 47th floor conference room of a man she had never met and saved him from a transaction that would have cost him approximately $370 million on the back end and a significant portion of his reputation on the front end. There is no reasonable scenario in which you allow that child and her mother to leave this building tonight and simply return to a cleaning shift and a school morning as though none of this happened. That is not generosity. That is the bare minimum of decency. I am only mentioning it because I have watched you build a life out of refusing to be sentimental, and I want to make sure that in this one case, your habit does not become an obstacle." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Teresa, yes, I had already decided that. I was going to talk to Mrs. Daniels about it before they left. I was going to do it carefully because I do not want her to feel that I am buying anything from her, but I had already decided." Teresa nodded once. "Good. Then I have nothing further. Call me tonight if anything new happens. I will see you at 8:00 a.m. She stood. She put her trench coat back on properly, buttoning it from the bottom up the way she always did. She walked across the room. She stopped at the leather chair. She crouched once more. She said something quietly to Imani that Edward could not hear. Imani smiled at her, the first real smile Edward had seen on the girl's face since she had walked into the room 3 hours earlier. Then Teresa left. Edward sat down in the chair across from Mrs. Daniels and Imani. The conference room was quieter now than it had been at any point during the afternoon. Outside the windows, the light was beginning to soften toward evening, the gray of the financial district shifting to gold along the western edges of the buildings. "Mrs. Daniels," he said, "I would like to make you an offer. I would like to make it the right way. I would like you to feel free to refuse any part of it, and I would like you to know that nothing in this offer is contingent on anything else, including your willingness to sit with me on Sunday afternoon. Go on. There is a scholarship fund at my firm. It is small and it is administered quietly. It pays for the full education of children whose parents work in trades that do not typically generate college tuition. Kindergarten through whatever school they finish, public or private, whichever they choose. I would like to enroll Imani in that fund. The enrollment is permanent. It cannot be revoked. I cannot revoke it. My estate cannot revoke it. It belongs to her." Mrs. Daniels did not speak. "I would also like to ensure," he continued carefully, "that the position you currently hold at the cleaning service is no longer the only option available to you. Not because there is anything wrong with that work. There is not. My own grandmother cleaned houses for 40 years, and I will not allow anyone to suggest in my hearing that there is anything wrong with that work, but because I think you should have a choice. There is a position open in the Building Services Management Office on the ground floor of this building. It is daytime. It pays approximately 3 times what you currently earn. The previous person held the position for 11 years before retiring last month. It has been open because we have not found the right person. I think you might be the right person, but I do not know you well enough to be certain, and I would not insult you by offering you a job you had not interviewed for. So what I am offering you is an interview, next week, with the head of Building Services, who does not and will not know that I am the one who suggested it." Mrs. Daniels looked at him for a long time. Imani had fallen quiet in her lap, the way children quiet when they sense that an important adult conversation is taking place above their heads. "Mr. Calloway," Mrs. Daniels said finally, "why are you doing this?" "Because your daughter saved me from the worst mistake of my professional life. Because I have a daughter of my own who is 28 and lives in Boston, and who I have not been a good enough father to. And because I cannot fix that, but I can pay attention here. Because I have spent 30 years building a portfolio of buildings full of people whose names I did not know and whose lives I did not consider, and a 7-year-old just walked into my conference room and reminded me that those people have names. Because if I do not do something different starting today, the worst part of what almost happened today is not the money, it is that I would have deserved it." He stopped. He had said more than he meant to say. Mrs. Daniels looked down at the top of her daughter's head. She smoothed one of the braids gently with her thumb. She was quiet for a long moment. "I will think about the job," she said. "The scholarship you may set up tomorrow. I will not refuse my daughter a future on my own pride. Thank you. And on Sunday," she said, "you will come to my apartment 3 o'clock. I will make coffee. My sister will be there. You will meet her. You will listen to her." "Yes, ma'am," she nodded once. Then she stood, lifting Imani with her, and they walked out of the conference room together into the long gold light of the hallway. Edward Calloway sat alone for a long time after they had gone. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Subscribe for more stories about the quiet courage of children who see what the rest of the world refuses to look at, and the small moments that change the entire arc of a life.